Good day, everyone. Good day. It's good to have all of you here on this lovely day. Welcome to today's Lawrenson Center event. My name is Michael Chan, and I am the Executive Director for Faith and Learning here at Concordia College. Overseeing the center, the Lawrenson Center, is really one of my most cherished responsibilities. The center honors the life and the work and the legacy of Norman M. Lawrenson, renowned philanthropist, former CEO of Burlington Northern, alumnus of Concordia College, and former member and chair of its Board of Regents. Through his life and through his legacy, Norm helps to build a more joyful and just and trustworthy world. And in honor of that legacy, the Lawrenson Center takes up this question: how do we build a more trustworthy world? Today's event features 4 distinguished leaders from our Fargo-Moorhead area who today will talk together about housing in Fargo-Moorhead, and we'll explore together both the challenges and the possibilities. They represent vocations from the world of politics, public policy and public service, and the nonprofit sector. Representative Heather Keeler of District 4A here in Minnesota, thank you for being here. Laetitia Mizero-Hellerud is Executive Director of Jeremiah Program. Thank you so much for being here. And yes, the hand wave is welcome so that we know how to identify you. Lisa Bode is Government Affairs Director for the City of Moorhead. Thank you, Lisa. And Pastor Sue Koesterman is Chief Executive Officer of Churches United. Thank you for being here. I want to offer a special word of gratitude to Representative Keeler, who's been a primary partner in designing the session. Thank you for that. If you know anything about Representative Keeler's legislative work, you will know that she's authored and co-authored numerous bills that seek to address issues related to homelessness and shelter scarcity, especially for those most vulnerable in our communities. I'm grateful for her work on these issues and for her partnership in the creation of this panel. So thank you very much. The timing of this conversation is also, it could not be more timely. Just last month in July, the Fargo-Moorhead Metro COG published a significant report titled Fargo-Moorhead Regional Housing Needs Analysis and Strategies. You can find this report, it's openly available in PDF form at www.fmmetrocog.org. I highly recommend that you read it. It's full of great graphs and insights, some of which we'll draw from today to shape the conversation. Finally, I'm joined today on stage by Maria Klipfel, who is a senior here at Concordia and is majoring in social work and minoring in psychology and English lit. So Maria, thank you so much for being here. It's your last year, congratulations. It's a delight to have you here on stage. And Maria and I are going to be co-moderating the session together today, so this should prove to be really interesting. Just in terms of the structure, we're going to have about 25-30 minutes of conversation together here up on the stage. And after that, we will invite our audience members, both those online and those who are joining us here in person, to pose questions to our panelists as well. Let me now hand things over to Maria, who will ask our first question. Thank you, Maria. Let's see. Test. I think it's working. There we go.
All right, thank you all for being here today. To kick off our conversation, we'll start with, why is housing an important topic of conversation right now? So you can go ahead and start.
So I think it's critically important because safe, stable, affordable housing sets the foundation for everything else in a person or a household's life. And so, housing is not just a place to lay your head, right? That's shelter, and that's part of what we do. But housing is about establishing and building a home. Right? That sense of privacy, that sense of autonomy, that sense of this is my safe space. And so I think that's why, for me anyway, why housing is so critically important.
And I'll add just my excitement at being on this panel, because everyone here is really passionate about affordable housing. And I've worked in the housing arena for more than 30 years. And it's always been an important topic, and I'd say it's probably always been considered a crisis and a top 5 issue in almost every community in the United States. I'd say what I've noticed is a real focus, change in focus to long-term solutions. And I've seen my colleagues here really working on trying to solve those problems. It's not just emergency shelter and either affordable rental housing or affordable home ownership, that entry-level home ownership. It's really getting to the root causes of what homelessness is, and then making sure that there's opportunities for upward mobility for people to grow into other opportunities, because it really is the foundation of success and the foundation of our communities.
So to echo my co-panelist, housing is foundational. I feel like there is nothing that we can do to succeed in life. We talked about mobility, economic mobility. Talk about employment. There are so many intersectionality when it comes to the reason why housing is foundational to success in general, and I feel that it's actually to understand the reason why housing is important for me. It's even understanding that shelter is a physiological need, and then from there we keep going, making it better. But we really need to understand that it's as important as air, food, and water, and then once that is covered, we can start talking about the types of housing, and affordability and availability and access. But I feel like it's important that we understand that truly foundation of everything that we do, we have to be able to have a safe place every night, and then everything stems from there.
All of that. And hi. It's nice to see all of you, but I think it starts with our day, right? Did all of you wake up this morning in a home? That's an honest. If you woke up this morning in a home, raise your hand. And we're all here. Y'all are dressed. You look fantastic. You probably were able to take a shower. You probably had something to eat. You probably had some sort of transportation to get here to a job or some sort of involvement or organization that you're a part of. That all starts from having a home. And I used to be a liaison, and I'd walk into the school, and kids would be having behavior issues or things would be going on. And the two questions that we would ask them is, do you know where you're staying tonight, and do you have food? Because if you can't answer those questions, all the rest of this doesn't even make sense. Now, how many of you have actually experienced homelessness in your life? You don't have to raise your hand. But if you have, what does the difference of your mornings look like? Getting your kids to where they need to be. Now the school's calling you because you're late. I mean, school here starts early. So if you have some issues with your housing overnight, getting your little kids to school by 7:35 a.m., then it's like this trickle effect. And so to me, it's the foundation of all the things, a good health in our community, good education in our community, making sure that we have the workforce that we need. Like if we don't have good homes, and they don't have to be big, fancy, extravagant homes. My grandma used to tell me, I grew up on the res, my grandma used to tell me it takes soap and water to have a nice home. Be with the people that you love. Be able to know that that home is mine, and I can stand behind that door and I can lock it and I can be safe here. That's what housing is about. It's not about these big picture things. And I think all of us get really into these small, passionate areas, but I think we have to address housing holistically. How are we making sure that we're healthy in our homes? How are we making sure that we're protecting Mother Earth as we build these homes, because she's sustainable for us long term? So I hope what we get into today is more the holistic piece of this and how we really look forward more than the brick and mortar of just a home, because it's so much bigger than that.
Thank you so much, Heather, for articulating something that I struggle to voice, because one of the reasons why I really struggle to even come up with an answer to that question is just the foundational nature of the issue itself. And so I'm really grateful that you covered that so well.
Thanks. Just a follow-up question that is kind of based, Lisa, off of something that you said. You've been in this work for, did you say about 20, 30 years? A couple of years? And you mentioned that the strategies have really changed around how we address housing. How have the challenges changed? How would you kind of think about the large arc of this question, and what are some of the challenges that might be unique to our time or might be kind of uniquely expressed at this current moment? And then I'd invite others to respond to that if you like.
The costs just keep escalating. The proportion of someone's income that is going toward housing at almost every level, up to the median income household, and as a city, we are. We're concerned about, emergency shelter, permanent supportive housing, entry-level home ownership, even the move-up homes to grow our community and have that healthy continuum of housing, senior housing. The cost of production has really increased, and that ability to afford that first-time home. We're hearing a lot in the news. I'm hearing a lot in the news this week about student loans and student debts with the change in policy. And, like in my own family, my daughter's husband is working to, pay down his student debt before they purchase their first home. And, during that time, housing prices have raised 18%. And so how do you break into that market? And so, I just think that the gaps have grown more, perhaps. That's where I see the most challenge. Does that answer the question, Michael?
It does. Are there others who want to chime in on that too?
I would.
Please.
Thank you. So at Churches United, whether it's in shelter or permanent supportive housing or at food pantries, the people that we serve are the people in our community who have had the most displacement, the most economic challenge. One of the things that we're paying attention to, and it impacts housing and safe housing and the safety of the community, is the impact, the long-term impact of the mental health epidemic that we have going on, the increasing incidence of chemical use disorder and the burden that puts on individuals and families. And then the other thing that we're seeing is just the impact of isolation. People aren't, and it feeds into everything else, the people that we see really are lacking supports beyond themselves. And we see more and more of that. People having less of a support network than ever before that we serve.
Please.
The question is about challenges, right? So, I think one of the challenges is we don't really have honest conversations about where we are in the spectrum of housing or the disparities that we have. Because I think often we think, well, we're out here in greater Minnesota and we're doing just fine. And we're not. And there's some data points that we need to talk about that I learned in this work that I didn't know, and I've sat in some of these spaces for my whole life, really. But when Clay County is the #1 for homelessness for Native American women coming out of incarceration in this state, we're #2 for Black men. Did you guys know that? No, Minnesota is 5th in the nation in the racial disparity gap for homeownership. 5th worst in the nation. Like, those are issues, those are things that we need to talk about. So I think some of the challenges is we tend to think that we're doing this okay because you live in a home. But like people like me, we don't live in homes. Let's be honest, like with the new, one of the biggest barriers to being a homeowner is student debt. Guess who just got all this new student debt unloaded on us? It's people like me. Like I was a first-generation college student. I did everything that everybody told me to do. I have 3 degrees, and it's different for people like us. And we have to have honest conversations about that. And, people are trying. And what Minnesota has done is we've done a lot of holistic investments in all of these spaces. The rule of 30 here is interesting, right? Because 30% of your income is what you should be spending on your home. Now, I'm not great at math, but what we know is that the average median income in Moorhead is $30,000 a year, and the average age of the individual who lives here is 30. So when you break that down, that means to be affordable housing in Moorhead, it has to be $750 a month. You tell me, I'll wait. Where can you find a safe, secure place for $750 a month? And then to flip that, when we look at children being taken away from their parents, most of them live in rental houses because that's what they can afford, and the landlords aren't fixing their things. So it's a cycle of generational poverty that continues to not allow us to be in homes. So I think the challenge is that we need to be real honest about where we are with things. We need to have honest conversations about the data, and we need to be real about who this is impacting. If we want our community to be good, I was raised that if I'm not good, it's because my neighbors aren't good. So I need to take care of my neighbors and help uplift them. And I think that's the other challenge is we always say, like, we want to help, but not in my backyard. And so we really need to think about that, and we need to be honest about the data in our community.
Great, thank you. So we're going to spend sort of the first part of this conversation really focused on trying to get a robust view of the challenges. And you all have already taken us there. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on that. And then the last few minutes, we'll spend some time thinking about ways to improve. What are the levers that are that exist to pull? So I'm now going to do something that's very academic and ask a really long question. And I'll ask for a panelist's forgiveness first. So several months ago, or I'm sorry, just in July, the Fargo-Moorhead Regional Housing Needs and Analysis Strategies was published. Again, I mentioned this earlier. It's available on the MetroCog website. And it summarizes 4 key findings that I want to lift up right now, some of which are positive and some of which present some really serious challenges. Number 1, there is strong employment in the Fargo-Moorhead area. Since 2010, the region has added nearly 23,000 new jobs, with thousands of jobs remaining unfilled and unemployment below 3% statewide. That's employment. Housing supply. It lags behind a changing demand. The majority of new housing supply production is in the southwest of the FM region, but new housing unit production has not kept pace with job growth. Finding number 3, an opportunity for increased home ownership. In 2022, the minimum income required to purchase the average priced home was $81,000. At this income, less than 20% of renters could purchase a home. So there's a social mobility question there. And then finally, there's a lack of sufficient affordable rental housing. Over 40% of all renters are cost burdened. So they're paying more than what they should be. Heather, you mentioned 30%. So they're paying over that for housing. The largest share of rental housing need is among the most vulnerable households, namely families earning less than $35,000. Now here comes the question after those paragraphs. Which of these 4 dynamics do you see playing out in your own areas of responsibility as you seek to work on behalf of our community? And anyone can, I'd like to hear from all 4 of you, but anyone can jump in first. Sure, why don't you, you go first. That's great, Heather.
So the first part of the question is around our jobs. Right? And I think, again, I have to explain the way that I think about policy. It's never just like housing as an individual thing. Like holistically means we look at things from all these different viewpoints. And so when we think about our workforce, I think we have to directly think about our childcare system. Again, I mentioned, right, a majority of the individuals who live here are in their 30s. That's also the time that we're creating families. And we are in a massive childcare crisis. I mean, like, massive. I'm even trying to push the state to help me define what that means, because whatever it is, our community is in it. Because yeah, we have jobs, but we don't have the people to do them if we can't afford to put our babies in good early childhood or childcare spaces. I mean, I don't know if you all have experienced in the last couple years. I mean, there's kind of the joke that goes around, right? Like the minute you pee on a stick, you have to find your daycare, because that's the reality of what the wait lists are here. So, I mean, I think we're having some honest conversations. Again, we've made investments on this side of the river to really invest in offsetting the cost of childcare. Because if we're not gonna, reduce the cost of a house, how can we offset some of those costs that we're seeing in other places of our bills? So I think that's one area. Housing market, geez, Louise, you gave me like the longest question. What was the second part of it? Like,
Oh, so housing supply, is that what you were wondering about?
Yeah.
So we lag behind the demand. And the majority of new housing supply production is in the southwest of the FM area, but that new production hasn't kept pace with the job growth.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a supply and demand issue that's real clear, and I think we need to think outside the box. I love being a forward thinker. I also love, thinking on ways that I love tiny home living. And I like what we're doing around some of the tiny home efforts across the nation, especially not everybody wants to live in these big homes. They're expensive to live in. But I think we need to utilize hemp a little bit more as a hemp fiber. If we look at our soil, we're an agriculture community. Sugar beets is one of our biggest industries here. And when we look at what hemp fibers can do to our soil, it increases the nitrogen, which increases the yield, which could be actually really beneficial long-term for our farmers. But also, nowhere in this nation is really utilizing hemp fibers in this way. You can do hemp fiber, hemp brick, hemp mortar, hemp insulation, hemp wood. It's all less flammable. It's more sustainable with Mother Earth, and it's more cost-effective. So to me, I think that we really need to think, again, holistically. How do we look at what the soil is providing us in our own backyard as one of the richest soils? The only comparable soil we have is to France. So we're sitting on a really unique space there. How do we start this new growth and new opportunity to do tiny homes holistically around hemp to make sure that we don't run into these supplies? Because right now everybody's fighting over the same supplies. And when you do that, the cost goes up and then we all feel that. So why don't we think differently? Why don't we think outside the box? We have some amazing organizations that are really focusing on this and working with our tribes as sovereign nations to do that. So I think we have to think very, very differently about a market that maybe we've seen do a cycle the same over and over and over. And the rest of the questions other people can answer.
Okay, so it's a long question, so I'll give you that. So I work with the Jeremiah program, and the Jeremiah program has a mission to disrupt the cycle of poverty 2 generations at a time. So we work primarily with single moms who are attending college. And the idea is to really accelerate economic mobility 2 generations at a time. Well, it's the single moms, talking about disparities. Single moms are very much impacted by housing is a general concern, one of the many barriers that they have. And they're put in this situation where they have to decide whether they need to take care of themselves and really increase their chances of economic mobility by going to school or being employed, and or like the choice between that and taking care of their families. So what I see is a solution, like one of the solutions or the opportunities, if I may say, is that our Jeremiah program, we try to approach, like housing is foundational, is one of the pillars that we support the moms with. So we do have moms who live on a building that is the Jeremiah program, and we also have moms who live off campus in the community, but we always make sure that safe and affordable housing is checked, because if it's not, they're not going to be able to go to school and persist. They are not going to be able to really take care of their children the way they should be taking care of them, or bring them to childcare. We also provide quality care for the children. So I truly believe that we look at this issue of housing and economic mobility is intertwined, and we also think about supporting these moms to go from poverty to more like a middle class, and then keep going upward. So long term, it's a great model if you think about it. But even short term, because the moms are housed And we do have a great partnership with Fargo Housing Program, Fargo Housing and Redevelopment Authority. So the moms have vouchers, like all the units have vouchers. Say they only pay 30% of their income. So I feel like that's one way for us to probably contribute to this issue, but at the same time acknowledge that it's a big barrier in general, in all aspects of life. So anyone wants to take it from here?
So from a local government perspective, again, all levels of the housing spectrum, and I think we're really fortunate that we have the nonprofit partners like Jeremiah Project, like Churches United, the Cass Clay Community Land Trust, and other organizations, Habitat for Humanity. We have that nonprofit infrastructure that are doing their best to address these housing challenges. And shout out to the Minnesota legislature. I was on a webinar this morning about statewide aid to, and I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but a housing aid that's coming through Department of Revenue to cities and counties to probably to fill in the gaps. We've, Pastor Sue will probably talk about some of the permanent supportive housing units that they're working on right now. And I know that it's really important because of the competitiveness of these applications that local communities can put in some investment into these developments. We had some inflation gap on a project last year, which was really a challenge, and we were fortunate to have some pandemic resources we could put toward that project. But this program that the legislature introduced this session will give us that aid, and we'll show them how well we can use it in Moorhead, and that will help us, I hope, build the case for that continued investment. There was discussion by the legislators on the panel this morning that, they really want to use this to show that the state needs to continue to invest in affordable housing because that isn't a large part of the state's budget. So this will be really an exciting time. The report that Michael referenced from the MetroCog says that in our metro area, we need over 16,000 housing units by 2032. Moorhead alone needs 3,700 housing units during that time. And that seems like a really difficult hill to climb, but I'm really glad we have the partners that we do that can help us chip away at that goal.
Thank you. So I'm so appreciative of Representative Keeler, Lisa, of Laetitia, our other partners in the community and in the region. I want to speak a little bit about two things. First, I want to talk a little bit about jobs and the economics of jobs. And Representative Keeler referenced that we need to have honest conversations, right? And so here's what I know from our day-to-day. Most of our adults who are staying in shelter work the equivalent of full-time. Mostly, they're cobbling together multiple part-time jobs or they're doing day labor. And so when it comes to making an application for rental housing or trying to save to buy a home, those kinds of very part-time, kind of cobbled together income sources don't look favorable for people who are seeking to get into rental housing or to look at buying a home. The other thing, and you're going to get a theological perspective here because I'm a pastor, and I'm a Lutheran pastor. Martin Luther wrote about vocation, and he wrote about vocation not just in terms of vocations like a pastor like me, right? But that every vocation has value, right? And I think that's something we've kind of not put enough emphasis on. I'm not going to say we've lost sight of it, but we haven't put enough emphasis on it. And so one of the big holistic things that I think we need to tackle and talk about is that every kind of work has value. It, not only careers or jobs where there's a high level of education or expertise, but every kind of work has value. And our communities, our state, our nation are so much stronger when people feel valued for the work that they do, for the meaning making that their lives have. And so, you know, one of the big things I think we need to talk about and have honest conversations about is that minimum wage isn't a living wage. And people, households, need to be able to have whatever the work that they do is, be compensated in such a way that they have access to the basics of life and community. And then I want to talk about a little bit about some of what we're doing. The fastest growing demographic among people experiencing homelessness are people over the age of 55. And those are folks who have either aged while homeless or aged into homelessness. And so we will break ground very soon now on the Silver Linings Apartments, which will be 36 units of permanent supportive housing for seniors 55 and older. Everyone who lives there will have either a history of long-term chronic homelessness or be termed high priority homeless or at risk of losing their housing. And this is really critical, and it's housing with supports. And so for the most vulnerable members of our community, and these are the people that we serve and that I know, that it's not enough for people who have a lot of barriers to stable housing to just put them in an apartment. For people who have a lot of barriers related to mental health or substance use disorder or chronic physical health issues, there have to be robust supports in place to assist households in attaining and maintaining housing stability. And I think we also need to acknowledge and have honest conversations about the fact that success looks different for different people, right? And so we've had the Bright Sky Apartments open now for about 5.5 years almost. And one of the things that I think is a success, it's not going to sound necessarily like a success to you, but one of the things that I identify as a success is that we've probably had 12 people during the life of the project who have passed away while they've been living at Bright Sky. Well, that's much better than dying in shelter, right? There's dignity to ending your life in your own home, your own private space. And so that might not sound like success to you, but it sure feels like success to me because there's dignity in it.
Yeah, so thank you for your answers so far. Each of you have touched on how housing is an incredibly complex topic of conversation and how it's not only about a home, but it's also about childcare and employment and mental health. So how do we begin to unwind the topic when we start looking for next steps? What do we focus on first?
Is it on? There we go. Yeah, you just hit an area of passion for me. How do we begin to unwind this, right? The first thing in my view that we have to do is we have to eliminate judgment. We pride ourselves on being person-centered, on being housing first and housing focused, but really at the root of it is helping people connect to the resources in the community that they need to move to what they identify as their best next future. And not what I think it would be, not what I think it would be if they made better decisions, right? Like, there's so much judgment attached to people who are struggling with poverty and economic insecurity. Those of you who know me have probably heard me say this before, but there is a moral failing assigned to poverty. And so I have come to believe for a long time that poverty is the last great sin in America, and I mean this in two ways. In a nation that has so much abundance, theological perspective here, that's a sin with a capital S, that anyone should lack access to safe housing, to shelter, to nutritious food. That's sin with a capital S. And then the other way I mean it is that if a person has wealth because of a particular talent that they have, and there's nothing wrong with that, we overlook behavior that we assign great fault to if someone is struggling with poverty. And so that's the other way I mean that poverty is the last great sin in America, is that we assign a moral failing to economic insecurity. And so if we're going to unwind this, I think the first thing that we have to do is really work on getting rid of the negative judgment that we place on people because of their circumstance. And that cripples folks long term.
So I'm thinking that we have had studies, many studies that get shelved afterwards. So one of the ways to unwind issues around housing is to use like the MetroCog study or report, and I'm thinking about our own area, and truly moving from conversations to action. And also making sure that we bring everyone at the table, and that like whether it's a private sector, government, nonprofit, like faith communities, like making sure that people who are living in, like impacted by these issues are also at the table, and thinking about the changing community, and making sure that all, diversity, are represented at that table, and that like all the voices are heard. And then when it comes to the next steps, making sure that there is really a sound strategic plan that's going to be implemented in a time frame that makes sense, like really a short-term, long-term, mid-term, long-term. Like you mentioned, small houses, tiny houses. I don't know. Like I'm actually enamored with, tiny houses. I live in a home that is like a decent size, but I keep telling my husband that I need a smaller house in the back. Truly, I think that I would move in that space. I feel like I need to be able to use every single space in my room. Otherwise, I feel like it's a waste. And I'm also, unfortunately, feel guilty because I feel like about other people who could be using that space. So I feel like if we don't, if I don't find a tiny home in my backyard, I may invite the community, like other people who need those spaces that we're not using in my house, to truly use that. So I don't know which, solution my husband is going to be, open to. But I really thinking about like where we build, like also building with, are we building in places that are close to public transportation, for example, thinking about the people who are impacted the most. Are we building with the end user in mind, like really thinking about the cost? But I'm also thinking about other solutions from other countries, because I've lived in a few, multi-generational homes. Like that's something that I also see is working in some countries. Of course, that's not part of the culture here, but it's also something that's shifting. I'm seeing more and more people living with their parents longer than before, and I see children moving back home. Sometimes it's not always a good sign, but you can also make it work with the right type of housing. So I can go on, but really affordability, access, and availability are the things that we need to keep in mind as we build, and making sure that all the voices are at the table as we plan.
My copy of that study is not on a shelf. I brought it with me. As part of it, there was a community survey, and there were 5 things that the community said were important to them. And one is demand for housing diversity. People want to see more townhomes and duplexes. Demand for mixed-use housing is strong, maybe even more so than multifamily housing. Most residents want more senior housing. Over 90% of residents want to see more senior housing in the region. And that affordability, as we've been talking about, is the largest barrier to homeownership. 60% of residents don't have enough money for a down payment, and 55% can't find an affordable home to purchase. Also, most renters want to be homeowners. There were only 10% of renters that were surveyed indicate that they do not want to own a home. I think that's changed over time. And that there's a lack of knowledge on existing programs. 65% of renters do not know about existing local homeownership programs. So we've got work to do, and I think just about everybody in this room could be part of the solution.
Yes, I do think that how we get better is we understand what supports we have out there. Because when the thing that I'm learning about our role in the legislature is we put all this money and investment into spaces, but it only works if you all know about them and then utilize it. And then that data comes back to us to say, yeah, you're right, Greater Minnesota needed this. And so the importance of this with the legislative hat moving forward is that in a lot of the housing, there was $1 billion that went out in our housing bill. We put $55 million specifically into Greater Minnesota funding. When we did the Pathway Home Act, which was $100 million into shelter capital specifically, 60% of that had to go in Greater Minnesota. I was the author of that bill. I was the champion of that effort. So it matters who's at the tables. For me, I continuously say, we need money to go to Greater Minnesota. This is not just Minneapolis-St. Paul. We have to do that, and we've really seen a lot of those numbers show that. But now it's in our job to utilize those. There's I talked about the disparities in home ownership. There's money out there. If you know individuals, when you're working with students, when you're working with homeowners, when you're working with generational individuals, make sure that they do know about this. And from a state level, I'm one person. And if you've looked at a map, I'm the one blue dot in the house on this entire state, on this entire side of the state, which right now, as we're in a trifecta, that means that I'm one voice for an entire side of the state. So instead of it just being me, I'm bringing chairs that sit at these tables that make these decisions out to this community. So we're bringing the Chair Pinto, who oversees child and family services. We're bringing Chair Liebling, who oversees health. We're bringing Chair Howard, who oversees housing. We're bringing Chair Gomez, who oversees taxes, because that's how we continue to do good, is that we show up as a community and share our Moorhead story. Share what we're doing here. Share the needs that we have. Share the vision that we have, because it is very, very different. And it's different than the other side of the river. We have to stop pretending like we're Fargo's little sister, because we're not. We're uniquely beautiful in who we are on this side of the river, and we need to start maneuvering in that way. And I think we need to start showing up and help me advocate to the state for how beautiful we are and why we need to continue this Greater Minnesota funding. Also to note, this community is the fastest growing community after the last census was out. It's the fastest growing community in Minnesota outside of Minneapolis-St. Paul. So we also need to highlight that and know that our growth is happening and continue to invest in that. How do we build some really unique things here so that we can grow a robust community moving forward?
Thanks for those responses. You all probably don't recognize this, but Maria just brilliantly went off script with that question about kind of unwinding the holistic problem. So Maria, as a senior social work major, somebody who just came off of an internship, how would you respond to your own question?
Thank you for the opportunity.
It was meant kindly.
Yes. I think part of the reason I asked this question is because going into this field, I recognize the need for it. I currently work at the West Central Regional Juvenile Center, and many of those kids who are staying there, that is their home. And it's interesting because every single person in here, every person ever, has a place that feels like home. And home is something that is with you throughout your entire life. Every day you think about what home is. And so for those kids, it is the juvenile center, and it is not with their family. But then I also work with the Rape and Abuse Crisis Center, and for some of those women fleeing domestic violence, their home isn't where they want to be, and they need to find a new home. And so I've worked with many people, children in the juvenile center, women seeking safety, and in each of these situations, home is something that isn't just short-term safety, it's a longer, like we talked a lot about mobility. It's not just a home, it's also your future, it's where you feel safe. And I guess as a future social worker, I'm kind of rambling here, but as a future social worker, part of my responsibility is to make sure that people have a safe home and they do feel safe and they have the resources that they need to succeed. And I think it's becoming increasingly relevant to me that no matter what population I work with, whether it do be the people at Churches United or the children at the Juvenile Center or the women at the Rape and Abuse Crisis Center, each of them are seeking a home. And so I think this is an incredibly relevant discussion, not only for legislation, but also individuals and how we approach conversations, because everyone has a home. So yeah, I'm super grateful for this panel.
No, thanks so much for jumping in on that. Last question, I'm going to ask our panelists to be succinct with this one, so I'll try and make it as clear. Yes, brevity, please. Brevity is the word of the moment. What is the most impactful action that can be taken in the next year to address our challenges, and who is the most important partner in the taking of that action? Okay. And then we'll go to audience questions.
I'll go quick. I think the number one person, the only person you can ever control is yourself, and all of you sit at tables that matter. So I think it's yourself. And I think that sometimes we have to pause and always think that we're making sure that we're moving with a mind frame of people over profit.
I would like to think about it for a second.
I can't really top that. I do think we're all part of the solution, and there isn't one solution. This is way too complex of a problem and an issue to really give like one solution. There is no silver bullet to this. It just, you have to dig in and just be tenacious and keep plugging away and trying.
Would you repeat your question, Michael?
Yeah, so what is the most impactful action that could be taken in the next year, and who might be the most important partner in the taking of that action?
So I want to just kind of build on what Heather said, because I think you did it very beautifully, but I agree, right? The most important person in this is each of us and the community, right? And so I was at a summit last week or the week before where there was a lot of conversation about the epidemic of loneliness and isolation, right? And so in some ways, we are more connected than we've ever been. And in other ways, we're more isolated from one another than we ever have been. And so I think the most important action that we could take would be to step out of our little comfortable self-made boxes and really engage with one another as community to work towards solutions.
So I'm thinking about power. So we do all have something that we can do to improve this situation. But I'm thinking about all of us not having the same power, and thinking about your personal power or your positional power, and truly making a commitment to doing something. So I think we all, to echo what have been said here, we all can do something to make this issue better.
Great, thank you all. What we're going to do now is open up the floor to questions in our last few minutes or so. So there is a microphone just over here to my right, to your left. You can feel free to use that microphone. Also for those online, I'll be monitoring the screen right here if there are some online who'd like to pose a question. Okay. All right. Here.
Hi, my name is Nicole, and I'm very short, so I'm going to have to move this microphone down. I have served on Moorhead Planning Commission, I think, for 6 years now. I greatly enjoy it. I didn't know a thing about housing or planning when I started, and now I know some things that I didn't know before. One thing I think about a lot is, I think most of us are here because we care about people having homes. And I don't think the issue is other people don't care about other people having homes so much as some people need to have issues framed for them as what is the benefit to me personally for you to have a home? And that's not my mindset. It's probably not anybody else's mindset. But I think if we really want to make change, we have to be able to explain to people what is the benefit to all of us, for all of us to have shelter.
Thank you.
If you look at the cost of where people end up if they don't have a home, the number one place that they end up is in our emergency rooms, and that bill ends up coming back on us, the community, in different ways. So I mean, I think if we need to do a dollar for dollar analysis of what it means to invest in somebody having a safe home, a place to go, a place to eat, we're investing in healthy communities, means that the overall cost burden of our healthcare industry doesn't come on our shoulders when people have healthy homes. I mean, we could go on even more, but one of the real significant things that we see is that we even know that there's stories of people who, if shelter is full, they'll call the police on themselves. Yes. Like, come get us. So it's either in our hospitals or our jails, which all it comes back as our cost, as a burden anyways. I do.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, and there is, in addition to not having enough housing, there's not enough shelter. And I'm so grateful that this shelter capital is coming down, and we're going to apply for some of it. We absolutely will. But on any given night in the Fargo-Moorhead community, there are far more people who are seeking shelter than there are shelter beds. And the goal has got to be enough affordable, safe housing for everyone, but a step along that continuum has got to be safe shelter and enough safe shelter. Shelter isn't the end game, but it is absolutely essential, and it provides that stable platform, that temporary stable platform from then which households can take the next step, knowing that they have a place to stay at night, knowing that they have a case manager who can help them connect to resources. And so I had to say something about shelter. And by the way, you talked about little sisters. I am the little sister of 4 in my sibling group, and so I will proudly own Moorhead being the little sister of Fargo, because that's just fine. Little sisters are okay, no matter what my brothers say. We're okay. Yeah, nothing?
That's fine. Let's go to our next question, and then we'll go to an online one.
Thank you for the panel. My name is Daniel Sampson. The intersection for me in this panel is I'm a pastor and a real estate agent. And the main reason I became a real estate agent because I see the need that people have and the lack of resources and education. So my question is for the panel and the specific groups you represent, what would you like to see more in the educational side from like the local associations and how they can reach and give back to the community?
Thank you for that question. Good question.
I'm not sure I understood the question, actually. What would we like to see more of? Can anyone rephrase that question for me?
Pastor, could we have you return to the microphone? There was a clarifying question there that would be appreciated. It sounds like you were asking something about kind of the intersection of your own ministry work and the real estate work that you do, and then there was a follow-up to it that we didn't quite catch.
It's like, what type of educational programs would you like to see, or like how would you like to see the associations get more involved in the community?
Great. Thank you for that.
So I'm thinking about the single women that are in Jeremiah program and what kind of next step, would be helpful in terms of securing housing beyond subsidized. So I feel that we could use more education on the different programs that can help, like first home, buyers, for example. Most of the moms leave the program with very good jobs and may not necessarily be at that income level that like 81,000. I think that's what you was mentioned in the study. But I think that if there are ways to help them get there, is like in the next 5-10 years, like helping them plan for that goal, like to be a homeowner, and why sooner rather than later, and why it may be more helpful when you're thinking about economic mobility in general. So I think that's a place that could be helpful, like educating people from like about the programs, but also how to access them, and having a plan, maybe planning, like financial planning, a component attached to that, on how to get there fast.
Can I add to that? Several years ago, the Village Family Service Center and their financial service center offered a wonderful metro-wide homeownership education program that was certified in both Minnesota and North Dakota for the down payment assistance programs. And when the village kind of changed focus with some of their issues and with their topical areas, and I think experienced some staffing problems and things, that program was discontinued. And there have been smaller programs that have developed. Cap LP has one. I'm sure Jeremiah has one. There's others that have developed over time that really had more targeted audiences. But that Metro program, I used to speak at them every month, and there were waiting lists for the programs, and several hundred people went through that program every year. And I feel that has been a loss for people, because it was that neutral place where you weren't, where a lender or a realtor wasn't, telling you to look at a specific property or, go with a specific loan product. And they brought in experts from around the community, and it really was that nice neutral place where even before people had started looking for a home, that's the best time to take home buyer education. And so I'd say, if any nonprofit financial education institution is out there that could handle that on a wide scale again, I feel that was really, really good for the community.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I also think the kinds of education about just consumer finances, right? Like, I would love to see more expansion of education opportunities around those, like, how do you do a budget? How do you live within that? How do you, it's nuts and bolts things that our folks need. And then, the other thing too is I would love to find more ways to encourage mentorship relationships, right? Between people in the community who have a certain amount of stability financially or a higher level of education, then to come alongside people who are working to kind of find their way forward. And that goes back to that community piece as well. But more mentorship type relationships and programs would be really helpful. And not just for kids, right? For everyone.
So I think what your question is kind of asking us, like, what are maybe some areas that we're missing in education around this, right? I mean, if I'm getting this right. Well, one, you're a black man standing in front of me doing something that we don't typically see, and representation matters. And I think we need to say that. And I think you being in spaces with communities who maybe don't feel trustworthy relationships with other communities in this conversation, because we know banks treat us different. We know historically there's things. I think that's one thing for you specifically that matters. I think also one of the things that we've done in our education policy space is we've actually added an opportunity in our schools to add financial education as an extracurricular component to high school education here in Minnesota, because we know that generationally, I've never owned a home. So no matter how great I am at understanding how to pay my bills, I pay $1,800 a month for years on my rent. Teaching my son the tools that he needs to own a home is different. And so I think, looking at our high school and understanding that we have this new capacity with our high schools and the curriculum, maybe they don't have teachers that can do something like that having this community partnership to come in and have conversations. I can tell you, I'm a spud mom. I have a senior. So anybody who knows me, I'm probably going to be crying most of the year if you've ever been a senior mom. But my son's mind frame is like, when I get this graduation money, what can I do with it? I didn't know that there were these life insurance plans that you can put money into and then it grows, that you can have like a bank against yourself. I'm 41, I missed that boat differently than he could at 19. And so, I think that that's one of those peak opportunities that we're just looking for somebody in the community to step up and help. And maybe your question and where you land in that is a really neat opportunity. I'm happy to help navigate any of that after this as well.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Gwen Hollis, I think we've got you behind there. Let's have you ask our final question, and then we'll conclude. Thank you, Pastor, for the follow-up.
Thank you. You heard I'm Gwen Hollis, and I'm the Dean of the School of Health Professions, so you might not be surprised that my question is about health. And I was glad to hear mental health come up immediately, and then physical health or the fullness of health came up as a rescue situation, that when people don't have shelter, where they end up is in the emergency room, which is really expensive and has a serious impact, not just on the individual and on society from a financial standpoint, but on our community health and our population health. So I want to think about how can population health be part of this conversation? How can health be part of understanding homelessness? How can a lot of stakeholders who provide healthcare services and have some control over where the money is spent for healthcare services, how can they be engaged in the conversation of why it is that homelessness contributes to a lack of health, and how if we invested earlier in the health process, it would pay off in the long run in terms of the cost of care, but also the health of the community. So any other thoughts about that, how we could do that, how we could engage people, how we could have this conversation?
This is a great example of how we increase awareness around different issues in our communities. And I'm not sure who gets invited to this particular forum, like here at Lawrence Center. But I've been part of many thought-provoking, timely, and timeless, issues that everyone should be really, proximate to in terms of being engaged. So I'm not sure if we invite healthcare communities at this discussion, but that would be someone to add as an example.
Well, in fact, I'm going to give an advertisement here once we're done with this question that is related to precisely this matter. So you all can finish answering, and then I'll offer that advertisement. Gwen, you might want to stay at the mic. So
May I? Heather has talked about having honest conversations, and one of the honest conversations we have to start having is about social determinants of health. Probably 8 years ago or so, I came across a statistic that just absolutely floored me, and it continues to do so because it continues to hold true. And that is the experience of chronic homelessness, 1 whole year homeless, or 3 or more episodes of homelessness in 5 years, okay, so that's chronic homelessness. People who have experienced chronic homelessness, their life expectancy is 25 to 30 years less than the general population. And so you can think about that in terms of how many years does a person live, but you can also think about it in terms of the deterioration that occurs earlier in life, right? I'm very fortunate in that, I'm in my early 60s and I have excellent health. I'm really happy about that. If you were to talk with one of our folks at shelter who's my age and has experienced homelessness chronically, biologically, they would be in their 80s or even their 90s. And so when we talk about social determinants of health, we've got to start having honest conversation about the impact of that on our communities, on the economics of our communities, the burden on our healthcare systems, the difficulty people have accessing good healthcare, good mental health care. We've got to have honest conversations about social determinants of health and what that looks like. Yes.
I'll add it quickly. The politician says, right? Yeah. 2 kind of answers to the question. I think first we have to reframe what health means. And I think this is where the difference in Western society medicine thinks health is just your physical body. Where for me as an Indigenous person, we think of health as a holistic well-being, which includes our physical, mental, spiritual, and mental health. Physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. If those 4 things are not equally aligned, you're not in your best self. And so when you go to the doctor, you're often asked like, okay, you keep getting strep throat, but nobody's also asking like, are you isolated? What's your mental health? We know that's an increase. We know, there's a lot of things that have happened. So I think one, just as health as a conversation in general, we need to understand that it's not just the physical piece. It's all these other components. No, I'll leave it at that.
Well, friends, let's begin by thanking our panelists for a really strikingly brilliant conversation. Thank you all for being here. Maria, thank you for helping me to co-moderate this, and just brilliant, brilliant insights. A couple quick announcements. If you are interested in getting engaged with any of the organizations or any of the leaders you see here on the stage, I encourage you to check out the table at the back near the cameras. Please don't trip on them. And there you will find literature and different ways that you can be in contact. Secondly, we want you to be in contact with the Lawrenson Center as well and to be aware of what is coming next. So on October 4th, Dr. Gwen Hallis and I will be co-hosting Dr. Ben Danielson as part of the Lawrenson Center's programming, and the topic will be healthcare. Where are we on the equity journey? Gwen, would you like to, I didn't prepare you for this, but if you'd like to offer any comments, you are familiar with Dr. Danielson, have worked with him in the past.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank you all again for this panel. I think it's been terrific, a terrific conversation that everybody needs to hear and hear more of. So yes, Dr. Ben Danielson is a pediatrician from the Seattle area who worked in a community health center for many years as a terrific leader in the community, and he made a very public statement at a point in time saying that he had to resign from his position because he could no longer tolerate the racism in the Seattle Children's Hospital institution. That is how I made some connection with him there and invited him to speak to Washington State University health professions students. And I heard him give the most clear and compelling discussion about what health equity is and the reality of the need for health equity, that I thought it would be important to bring him here to keep having this conversation. We need to keep having this conversation because it's so important. And we can't do it alone. Healthcare can't do it without connecting with everybody else in community and other institutions and other funders and governmental agencies who can help us. These are complex and wicked problems, and we all need to participate individually and institutionally. So thank you, and come here, Dr. Ben Danielson.
Thanks, Dr. Ellis. Now, the way you stay connected with us is there are cards on all of your tables. So they have QR codes. Make sure you click those QR codes, and I want you to do two things while you're there. First, sign up for our newsletter, which comes out on a bi-weekly basis. And secondly, under the events tab, you will find a registration link for the conversation with Dr. Danielson on October 4th. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, great afternoon. Thank you for your participation. Oh yeah, you bet. Good idea. Just give me a second.